Good afternoon, Maine. This is the Muddy Waters podcast, and I'm your host, Chuck Ellis. Some might call me your swamp guide as we look through the murky waters of Maine politics and talk about what's going on. And I do that by bringing on people from around the state who know more than I do, hopefully, about what's going on and help educate the people because the mainstream media is not doing their part. So today we're blessed to have with us honorable or potential gubernatorial candidate, however you want to call it, or doctor, apparently. I think you said you have an honorary doctorate.
It's a fake doctorate.
Yeah, fake doctorate. Garrett Mason. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chuck. I would be remiss if I didn't say I've enjoyed the podcast, and I think it's really great that someone's started to kind of fill that void of long range interviews. So it's been fun to watch.
Yeah, well, thanks. I would be remiss if I didn't say I got a lot of help getting into it by one truth slinger. He was helpful. I think I probably would have figured it out, but like I learned a lot from him in the early days on how to do this. So appreciate that. But no, it's kind of something where like for years I talked about or friends of mine, because I would do these like mini TED Talks at work where something would happen and I would be like, okay, you guys just need to understand this. And whether it was about banking or sometimes about politics or sometimes about something else, I would just kind of do this thing. And people are like, you should do a podcast. And I'm like, nah, I don't know that I have that much to say. But in the back of my mind, I was like, that would be kind of fun. So somehow now, here I am. And I don't think I really knew what I was going to get into when I started, but I started having guests on and found that this is a really great niche because, I can't go out and be an expert in every category in every area. I'm not the Ben Shapiro, who and he's not right about everything either. But I'm not him. That's just not my style.
You're way more of a Joe Rogan than a Ben Shapiro. I'll go with Joe Rogan for you.
That's the goal. Obviously he's the best in the business. And he attracts a wider audience though, because he doesn't only talk about politics, I think, but
no, he runs the gambit. That's for sure. But this is new media. This is, the way that things are going. And it's, I think a lot of people who are running for office, a long range interview tests people and do you know what you're talking about, do you have a vision? And I think that these are really really important conversations. I'm one of the Republican analysts on Political Brew, and every Sunday I get to go on TV and kind of spar back and forth with my Democrat opponent, and there's only so much you can say, there's only so much you can get across. And, it's a lot of fun, but, me and whoever the Democrat is that I'm debating that week always says, I wish that we just had a full show where we could, take one idea and extrapolate it so that people can understand the arguments. But this is the forum that does that. So I think it's great. Yeah. I think it's super fun. And you're definitely on my feed. I get the new episodes when they pop up. Yeah. And it'll be super weird when this one goes up and,
you're on it. Well, if what I would love to do at some point, you mentioned that you and your Democrat counterpart would love to have a longer period of time. I would love to provide that space. If he's serious, if whoever your opponent is serious about it, I'd love to one of the things I've been trying to do actually, or wanting to do is to kind of have a little bit more of a, round table kind of situation and have multiple different viewpoints. I've got a guy from the Libertarian Party who's interested in coming on, and anyway, so if you've got somebody who's willing,
we could make that happen. I bet we could. Yeah,
that would be a lot of fun. Because I have an open mind of, I've had some Democrats on here. I'm not. And as I commented on this when I had Bill Diamond on recently, I'm less of a Republican than I am somebody who wants to make the world a better place. And right now, most of my life I was actually unenrolled, but mostly voted Republican because of issues of life and some other issues where I tended to. Now though, like I like the Democrat Party is just completely untenable, and what I don't want is a world in which I don't want a Republican Party that dominates the entire world because I just love the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party has its own problems, but right now it just seems like
for
it's
sure.
right. Like
Yeah.
right. Democrats, when you look at their agenda, it's not like 10 years ago, I was concerned about the Democratic Party because of what I believed that they wanted to do, but they weren't saying out loud. Now I'm concerned about what they're saying out loud.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because it brings me back to my first campaign when I ran for the state Senate for the first time in 2010. And I was running in a district that had been Democrat for a really long time. You know, when you run for office, there's typically 3 tiers of candidates. There's the ones you have to protect. You know, there's the ones that you're going to compete for. And then there's the ones that are like, thank you for trying. And I was 100% in that like basement level. Thank you for trying. I was 25 years old at the time. You know, and I'm sure we'll get into my own story later, but you know, one of the things that I did in that campaign was I knocked on 10,000 doors in that campaign. I still have my sheets that I marked off people's doors, just as a reminder. And what I did was I walked around with the Democrat Party platform from 2008. And I walked around and I highlighted a bunch of stuff in it. And because I would get this response at the door all the time of, well, I'm a Democrat. My dad voted Democrat. My mom voted Democrat. We love the Kennedys. You know, it was that response. And I had to figure out a way to counter that. And so what I did was I walked around with the Democrat Party platform and said, well, do you believe this? Do you believe that? And I brought out a lot of these. I mean, they were actually quite public about a lot of these socialistic behaviors that they wanted to start to emulate in 2008. It just wasn't, people don't read the party platforms. You know, not that they're the be all end all and you have to follow them right to the core, but you know, they were saying these things for a super long time. And I believe that was part of the reason that I won that election is like, this isn't your daddy's Democrat Party anymore. This is a way different thing. And you're seeing that with those type of Democrats, the Tulsi Gabbards, the RFKJs, those guys, that they're now Republicans. They're Republicans. And we've said that for years that, you know, JFK today would be a Republican. Like you put JFK on the ballot today, he would be a Republican. And I remember when I was a kid, my great grandmother, you know, she was one generation removed from coming over from Italy, and she was a very proud American. And I remember whoever the president was at the time in her house in Auburn, she had the picture of the president on the wall. And I remember a picture of Bill Clinton on the wall. She didn't like Bill Clinton, but he was the president. And, you know, you could, even back then, you could rationalize a way to get to Bill Clinton, but it's so different now. That is not what we're dealing with, is those kind of Democrat politicians. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, the reason it's so interesting. Like, I'm always at risk of upsetting like the super hardcore Trumpers. I like Trump. I think he's the best policy president we've had. But like the people that are just so enamored and completely in love with him, you know, I think they don't realize that the reason that Trump won is not because he's so lovable and everybody trusts and believes that he is a good guy, but because they were more concerned with the other side, specifically with the policy, but also with the fact that the presidential candidate was incompetent and couldn't sit through a Rogan, couldn't sit through a constructed interview from people on her own side, let alone a Rogan style interview like that. She just was terrible at having a conversation, which I don't even understand how she got so far in life without being able to put together 2 sentences back to back. And she,
I mean, when you fail on a podcast like Call Her Daddy, right? Like that is genuinely geared for her. In fact, she spent $200,000 to have the set recreated because she didn't want to travel there. Like when you fail at that, it makes you scratch your head. How did this happen? And and thank God that it didn't. Like thank God that that did not happen. But I mean, yeah, I think Trump spoke to something. Like Trump spoke to something to people in 2015, and I do think it was the forgotten man thing, but it wasn't necessarily Trump. It was what he was saying and how he connected with people, and that he was for the common man, even though he wasn't the common man, and it was realistic politics, and I think when people point figures and talk about how, oh, well, look at what he did here. He wasn't the most moral man in the world. And, like on our side, there's a lot of biblical figures who weren't necessarily the most moral men in the world. I mean, Moses was a murderer. He killed a guy. King David he wasn't a clean living kind of guy.
An adulterer and a murderer. And he killed a blind guy when one of his sons raped one of his daughters. And
but, right. Like, I mean, we could go through lots of many more there. Bible characters, who like were leaders, were political figures, and they, Donald Trump looks like, an altar boy compared to some of these people. So it wasn't Trump. He was speaking to what Americans have been crying out for a really long time.
Yeah, it reminds me of I've read War and Peace, which is crazy to say because that book is a mammoth. Well, I read like 80% of it and then set it down, and then I couldn't pick it back up. And then shortly before the pandemic, I think, or maybe during the days of the pandemic, I got into audiobooks. And so I re-listened to the whole thing on audiobook. Tolstoy is an incredible author. It's a lot though. But one of the things that he talked about, I think it was in regards to Napoleon rising to power, was that Napoleon's rise to power was a combination of the man that Napoleon was and the moment, essentially in time, and what was happening within the people in the moment. And I think the same is true of Trump. It's partly who Trump is, right? Obviously, that's connected to it. But it's also like just what's going on in our world and why people are drawn to that person. Like it's not all just him. It's this combination of everything that's going on. As you say, the forgotten man, the significant, like the people who are the kind of like the foundation of this nation in terms of like everything else rests upon them are the ones that were that forgotten man, that forgotten woman. So everything's on their shoulders and nobody cares about them and nobody's taking care of them, and we wonder why things are starting to go a poor direction. And then you had Trump, who came in and spoke to those people and definitely rallied those people behind him. But despite all that, like very thin margin of victory. And I think it had to do with, in addition to all that other stuff that has, like, he's got his base as a result of that, but you had so many people vote for him because of partly because of how terrible of a candidate Kamala Harris was, but also because of the policies that the Democrats are saying out loud now.
Yeah.
That's a huge piece. And Trump did a really great job of emphasizing that.
Yeah. I mean, and we see it, we see it on the state level. I mean, like, I do work for various clients at the state house, and, so you kind of have to sit through all the other stuff to get to whatever issue your client wants to pay attention to. But, some of the things that are being pushed up here are just wild. Are completely wild. And even when I was in the state Senate from 2010 to 2018, would not have even been fathomed. I mean, there was a few like very left-wing politicians that, you knew they would say things about, trans girls in sports and, all of those type of things, but they weren't taken seriously. Like that, right. This is now the central identity of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And they're not hiding it. And I think Chuck, what even is more staggering to me is that even on an issue, and I just mentioned trans girls in sport, and it's because it's coming up in the legislature, I think at some point later today or tomorrow. But they're
actually going to vote on it.
Yeah, it's coming very soon.
Ooh,
It's very, very
interesting.
soon.
Yeah. Okay.
But, you bring that subject up, and it's an 80-20 issue. Like, and I say that, I know that's the popular talking point amongst Republican politicos, is that it's an 80-20 issue. It really is, even
Yeah.
in Maine. We've seen that
Yeah.
polling, maybe a little less than that in Maine. We've seen this, and they are still clinging to it. It's because it's dogma. Like, for a lot of
Yep.
these people, it's dogma, and they're not going to go down. They're not, they will go down with the ship on some
Yeah.
of these issues, just like, for someone like you and me. I mean, abortion is just a hill that I don't care. Like, you cannot vote for me, I don't care. Like, this is how
Yeah.
I feel, and if you don't want,
Yep.
if that is going to cause you to not vote for me, that's fine. It's the same on the other side for issues like this, and they've become so radicalized on subjects like that I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these people like, I can't go there. I just can't.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. So I've commented on here many times before, so hopefully this doesn't bore people to say it again. But like, yeah, I mean, they've been spouting. So one of the things that's interesting about politicians in general is that they don't. A lot of politicians, especially on the Democrat side, seem like they're unwilling to ever admit that they've made a mistake. So that's part of their problem. Their dogma is that we can't ever admit that they've made a mistake. The Pope has never been wrong. Kind of similar ideology behind it, right? Is like we can't ever admit that we've made a mistake, and they've been telling us that if you tell a trans person that they are not 100% exactly the same as the
Mhm.
other people that identify as whether it's a woman or a man, whatever it is, then you're at risk of causing them to commit suicide. This is what they've been saying. This is one of the central tenets of that ideology, right? Is that they are 100. A trans woman is a woman, is what they keep saying, right? And so therefore they can't back down on this, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise they would have to admit that they were wrong, that that's not true, and then that would just destroy them with their own base. I mean,
Yeah.
it probably will at some point in the near future blow up the Democrat Party, and we'll see what's left of it. I imagine maybe two parties will form out of it. Maybe America will become more than just a two-party country. But
That'd be
but
interesting,
like
right? I mean,
it,
that'd be
it
that'd be kind of
I
interesting.
I don't know what other option there is, because I mean
Yeah.
it's either going to like die at like a slow death, because I can't imagine it surviving unless they admit that mistakes were made, and that they're wrong about some of this stuff. Because especially as the data comes out about like how this impacts kids when you do this to them when they're children, and these surgeries and all this stuff, the long term, as we
Yeah.
get to the point where long term exists for this type of stuff, which we're still probably 5 to 10 years away from really seeing the long term impact, as this ideology continues to get played out. And when that happens, like they will 100% lose their shirt if they haven't made it, if they haven't admitted that they might be wrong about it by then.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. But anyway, I could talk. That's a topic that I'm just so passionate about, because I think it's so despicable and so harmful
Yeah.
to children and their mental health and all this other, like the mental health of all children. Because not only is this happening to some, but they're basically being told that this is, for everybody's having to deal with this, like, insanity, 2 + 2 = 5 kind of nonsense that just messes with, your understanding of who you are in the world. It's like, what
Well,
is
and
going on? Yeah.
you have to remember, and I do try to bring this grace to people, is like, there's also a lot of kids, and like, who are probably in their 20s and maybe even 30s now, who have been lied to their whole life,
Yep.
who have been
Yep.
lied to, and they don't know any better. Like, they've been told their whole life, you are a girl, you are a girl. That's, you were born in the wrong body. And, you know, I try to approach a lot of, as much as I can, with a lot of compassion, with
Yeah.
that,
Absolutely.
because it's not their fault that they've been sold a lie. And you see it
Yep.
with like the Chloe Coles of the world, that when thank God she recognized it a lot earlier than most, but you're
Yep.
seeing a larger detransitioner movement. And as the dad of a daughter, I have a 5-year-old little girl, and before I got into politics and the road that I'm on now, I was in sports. I worked in professional sports, and you can't tell me that a grown, a grown man, or even an adolescent man, is the same kind of powerhouse as a woman at the same age. It's just not true. I've witnessed it, my whole life. And so I think we're putting people at danger, in severe danger. And I also, think that as the dad of a daughter, that's something that I very much care about and am on guard for. A lot of the times I've actually, that I've witnessed men going into women's bathrooms and places like the mall and other places that we've been, and you kind of feel helpless as a dad. Like you feel helpless to be like, I got to protect this little girl, and society is just moving so in a different direction. But hopefully that changes soon, and I think we're on the cusp of it.
I think either Armageddon or that changes. One of those two things is going to happen.
What an option! What an option! Yeah.
So, hopefully things come around.
Giant meteor 2026, right? Like that bumper sticker.
Yeah. So anyway, so let's go. So normally I start off when I have guests on, I think, if you've by letting you talk about who you are, where you come from, and how you what kind of has brought you into the world of politics, but you've been at it for a while. So also maybe we'll get into a little bit of what you've been doing since you got done. But yeah, so what's your background, and how did you get involved in politics in Maine? And we'll talk a little bit about your time down there, and then I guess you have you run for governor in the past? Is that
I ran in 2018.
So we'll get into that too.
Yeah. No, so this was not a path that I had ever envisioned myself on. I think when we're all kids, we think, I want to be this, I want to be that, you name the profession. This was never anything that crossed into my brain. When I was in high school, I was a really bad athlete. Really, really bad athlete, but I did love sports. And when I was in college, I didn't really have any kind of, drive to, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just figured I'd go to school for business. So I did. And about halfway through, I was in a class and they had touched on some sports marketing stuff. And I'll never forget it. It totally struck me as, oh my word, like when I go to a Red Sox game, there's somebody organizing the hot dogs. Like there's somebody organizing, selling the advertisements that you see, out in various parts of the stadium. And I realized that there was a whole business behind it, which I never had really thought about before. And it totally lit a fire in me to work in sports. Figured if I couldn't play them, then I would work in them. So I worked really hard to graduate from college early because the Portland Sea Dogs had a 9-month internship that started in January and ran through their season. And it was the best internship in minor league baseball. And I really wanted to be part of it. And I applied 2 years in a row, ended up getting accepted on my senior year, and graduated early, came home and went to work for the Portland Sea Dogs in the group sales department. It was awesome. I mean, I still look back on it incredibly fondly, to be able to learn from an organization like them on how to make, a sport entertainment. And it's really, really a fun summer. I had a great time. And
yeah, they do a great job, by the way. They're just like, the Sea Dogs are fantastic at making it fun. And it's,
well, they are, and they're
a great organization.
They've won so many awards of different, through minor league baseball and even in business in general, just because of how innovative they've been. A lot of people don't know this, but the team that's still there now, many of them have worked for the organization all the way back from when it started in the 90s, when they were Marlins affiliates. So there's a culture there of excellence, and there's, they've been really innovative with, how to make the Sea Dogs a destination event for coming to Maine anytime in the summer. You want to go to a Sea Dogs game. But it was a magical summer. Have friends that I still talk to every day that were part of that internship class. But, at the end of that, we did get some offers to go work in the Red Sox front office, but, I didn't have the pedigree. I didn't, it was folks that, they were in the ticket office, but, they went to Suffolk, or they went to BU, or they went to Harvard. And I went to school in Florida. I didn't. I was just a kid from Maine, and I knew that the ladder was kind of steep, and so I needed to move into something else. And the Lewiston Maniacs had just won their championship with the Canadian Hockey League, and that was right next door. I'm from Lisbon. It was right next door to me, and so they needed a PR person, so I applied for the job, and I got it, and ended up working for them for 3 years. And I actually ended up liking working in hockey a lot more than I liked working in baseball. So worked in hockey, had a great time. The schedule was better too. So you got your summers not off, but you weren't doing games in the summer.
Yeah.
Really amazing organization as well. And we were, through a series of events, the team was getting ready to relocate back to Quebec. And I was one of the last employees in the office at that time. And so I kind of de facto began, running the business operations of the club for the last year that I was there. And it was during that time where I got my first brush of politics and business and the intersection of them. I won't lie, I had my mom and my cousin, who is Dale Crafts, who ran against Jared Golden in 2020. He was in the legislature at the time, and I found out that they had passed 102 new sales and service item taxes. It was LD 1495 back in 2009. And there was a people's veto referendum that had been going around to reject these taxes. Well, one of the taxes that was on that list was sports tickets. And because hockey's season tickets straddle 2 calendar years, half of our tickets were taxed and the other half were not. And when I found out about this, I had a conversation with Dale and said, "Hey, you should talk to your state senator. I didn't vote for this, obviously, and you should get involved in the veto effort." And so I had a conversation, with him, and found out that nobody had really, we are a major sports franchise. You could have called and checked in, "Hey, how is this going to affect you? What's this gonna, how's this gonna impact your business?" And nobody asked. And it was a huge bill. It was a huge amount of money that was going to cost us. And, considering that we were also looking at moving to a different country because it was so expensive to operate in the United States at that time, it would have been nice to know that was something that they were considering. So one thing led to another, and I decided to run for the state Senate as the team was getting ready to leave Lewiston. And because I was pretty hot about it. So I ran, had a primary, won that primary, didn't know what a primary was at that time. And then, I just said, I have this time. I got done with the Maniacs. I, didn't have a family. It was just me, didn't have any school debt. I'm like, I'm just going to do this, see what happens. And I think I can make a difference. And so that summer I knocked on 10,000 doors, and just outworked my opponent, and ended up winning on election night by 11% of the vote. I was one of the first races called, and I was on no one's radar. And, ended up being, I remember the next day, that was the same night that Paul LePage got elected for the first time. We had a Republican majority in the legislature for the first time in 40 years. And we had no idea what we were doing. There was a lot of members like me who we'd never been in public office. We didn't know where the levers of government are, let alone the bathroom. And I remember walking into the State House, and I was with Dale, and we walked into the Hall of Flags. I had never been to the Hall of Flags before, and walked in, and there was a press conference that we were all going to be part of with the Republican caucus. And I looked around, and I saw all of these people walking up and down the stairs in the State House, and they were all crying. And I looked at Dale, and I said, "Dale, I'm like, everybody's so happy that we won. I can't believe this." And he started to laugh, and he said, "Garrett, they're not happy. They're crying. they're all Democrats and they're all going to lose their jobs. And it had never occurred to me that that was what was going on. But, as we look at 2026, it's a funny story. I think that people need to realize that that's what you're up against. We had 2 years of a Republican trifecta in Maine, and we did a lot of really great work. Don't get me wrong. I mean, one of the first bills that I sponsored was a charter school bill that is still in effect today. Like we have 9 public charter schools in Maine. There's probably going to be a 10th on the way, providing an option for families. But
Nice.
We did some great work, but you are up against not just a majority party in the Democrats who want very different things. You're up against a bureaucracy that's willing to wait you out. And, whoever the next candidate for governor is, or, hopefully the next Republican governor and the next Republican legislature needs to realize that you have a very limited time. And there's no time for on-the-job training. You have to have somebody to go in there and root this stuff out. You're only going to have one chance. And, as we look at 2026, those are the things that I'm thinking about as we approach decision time.
Yeah. No, I think that one of the things I've heard from a lot of people that were in, I think Gary Plummer was the guy he ran for state senate.
My co-chair.
He
was my co-chair of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. Him and I. He's a wonderful man.
Yeah. So he kind of helped show me the reins of door to door when I first was running. He came out and did some doors with me, helped me get the last of my signatures that I needed to get on the ballot. And he was running for state senate at that point because Bill was retiring, and and it's interesting. It was one of the comments that he kept making is that, like, we're hoping, because this is 2022, so LePage was on the ballot, and so there were, for a lot of people who had been involved in Maine politics back then, I think there was this hope: LePage is coming back, things are bad economically, we're going to win this big victory, and we're going to take back control, and we're going to be able to do the things that we didn't do enough when we won the legislature. This is the comment that kept being made: we didn't do enough, and we got to get in there and get it done. But I think that's, like, if we are able, and I think that there's a chance. I think that winning the House, as far as I can see, is very, very much within our range. Winning the Senate is a little bit more challenging, but still, we've got a few key seats that we kind of have to win outside of any anomalies like you did in the previous, in the past. But I see that as being very, very much within range. But when it comes to the governor, I get a little bit more nervous because of, like, history.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump lost Maine by 6.5%, I think, in 2024, and again highlighting the fact that you have one of the best policy presidents in my lifetime, if not ever, against one of the probably the worst presidential candidate in U.S. history. And we still lost by 6.5% in the state. And whoever runs for governor, probably, it'd be hard to say there'll be a better policy. I say policy. Trump has a lot of other things that he does that causes people to dislike him. If it were policy alone, I think it would be a bit closer. But they've got the TDS that we talk about, like Trump derangement syndrome, that motivates a lot of people to vote against him without even thinking and really considering the other side. So we won't have that involved, but there also won't be as much, like, love from the base as there is for Trump. So either way, I think, like, best case scenario, it's like a net neutral for whoever our gubernatorial candidate is. And I was going to follow that up with another point, but either way, I think it's like, you won't have it, like, whoever runs, I shouldn't say this because maybe they will be, but it's unlikely that whoever runs as the Democratic candidate will be as bad of a candidate as Kamala Harris, because they both have to be, like, incompetent and evil, essentially, in terms of their policy, which I think we might be able to get one of those, but probably not both of them in the same candidate.
Yeah, I mean, that is a fair analysis. No, I think you're right. I think you're right. There's, like I said, there's no opportunity for on-the-job training. It's going to be a very uphill climb to win the race. However,
Yep.
it's not unwinnable.
Right. Yep.
It's, anytime you look at races like this, um, there is an opportunity. It's just
Yep.
how closely can you thread the needle? Um, but you look at other environments where this has happened, and we've done it before.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very lucky that the Senate class of 2010 was in the majority for 6 out of the 8 years that we were
Wow.
in the legislature. So, the Senate, you know, we kind of ran our own campaigns and had our own agenda, and it seemed to work. We were able to win those elections in those hotly contested seats. And in fact, we got all the way up to 20 seats at one time. And so when you look at races like that in aggregate, you can win. Like I have no doubt. I have no doubt that the Republican conservative slash populist message, when articulated correctly, is a winner. It
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Yep.
what we're seeing right now in Augusta, as we sit, we are one of the highest tax states in the entire country. I know you're a landlord. I'm a landlord too. I own my own house. The property taxes in some of these towns. My town of Lisbon is looking at a 21% property tax hike in 1 year, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But there is we people are being taxed to death, and you have to consider how to fix that. And it's not enough. It's not enough to say, I'm going to lower your property taxes. I'm going to lower your income taxes. Because whenever I start hearing things like that, I know that the job interview for that particular person isn't going well. Because any candidate for governor on the left or the right who's saying to you, I'm going to lower your property tax, does not know that they can't do that. That is purely a function of local government. And unless you're going to offer massive tax rebates, through the government and in some ridiculous scheme, you can't do that. And the next governor has to know what they're capable of. They have to know what they're constitutionally not allowed to do, and don't chase things that can't happen. And the next candidate for governor has to be incredibly disciplined and work with the legislature to get stuff through very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely need that out of the. I mean, those are some of the like my brain. I think quite often people talk about doing things that they don't actually have the power to do, and I think it's
Yeah.
obviously really important that we communicate clearly about what can and cannot happen. There is like some degree of potential impact for at the legislature to do things that can impact local politics. Theoretically, I think is mostly what it is. But it's like if the government says if the state says that they're going to pay a higher percentage toward education than they're currently paying, that could theoretically all other things being equal, that would reduce the costs to the taxpayer in the town. The problem is that there's no way that's ever going to happen, because that's when the school boards are going to be like, all right, well, we're going to increase the budget because we have more money coming from the state.
Yeah.
And so
But that's where you have to have a governor who understands what's going on. I'll use my own town for an example. All right. So I'm from Lisbon. All right. One of the biggest complaints of our school department in our town is that they can't keep teachers. They can't keep them, because this is what happens. They go through training in the Lisbon school system. They find a nice house in Lisbon at an affordable price, right? And then they go school shopping in places like Cape Elizabeth. Every school can decide what they want to pay their teachers. There's no uniformity. So you can live in Lisbon in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. You can leave the Lisbon school department and you can go work in Cape Elizabeth and make a lot more money. And so what happens is this constant race to the top. So you have these towns like raising their teacher salary, raising. Paul LePage had it right. Some of the ways to fix these problems aren't really that hard. A statewide teacher's contract would reduce the amount of overall cost over education almost immediately. Everybody's getting this.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
Everybody's paying the same. Everybody's paying relatively the same scale for their teachers, and you're not dealing with, one school robbing another school of a really good teacher, because it creates this environment where you're just trying to top each other on price. And that's part of what you're dealing with in the legislature. One of the biggest reasons that the state could never meet the 55% mandate that the voters set is because schools get to decide what their budget is. So the state doesn't
Right.
actually know
Yeah.
what 55% is. 55% of what? Well, we don't know, because the school boards have,
Right.
get to decide what they're spending. So you have to think creatively about how you pay for these type of things. And, while we're on education, if you don't mind,
No, go.
there's people, the traditional education system is being upended. It's being upended by a couple of things.
Well,
A
it
lot
doesn't
more parents.
exist. Education
No,
doesn't
no,
exist in Maine. Like, I
no.
don't know what they're doing, but they're not teaching kids. I mean, we see the kids coming out and they're not able to work a job. They can't handle any criticism. They want you to hold their hand for anything that they have to do and roll out the red carpet and praise them for the stuff that you did for them and pay them as though they're a 40-year employee, when they're not only are they have no experience, but they probably won't last for more than a year and a half, if you're
Yeah.
lucky. And so,
Well,
yeah, so
well,
education.
yeah, and brick and mortar education is going away. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, I think there's always going to be a need for a physical place, but a lot of parents are working from home, and there's
yeah,
a lot of parents that would love to spend more time with their kids. And they could, you can do a virtual option. And when you bring that kid out of the school, if a virtual option works for them, that's more funding that the school loses. And as long as we continue to stick around and say, no, we're going to do school the same way that we've done it for the past 250 years, and not adapt to what's going on right in front of your face. And that, yes, there's a lot of parents out there that are perfectly capable of teaching their kids. Like, if you don't realize that reality, we're just going to continue to dump money into an education system that is out of date, and not doing the core competency of, like, I don't know, teaching your kids. And that's something that I look at too, is like, we're not facing the reality of where we are in the world with regards to technology.
yeah. I mean, there's so much that's going on that we could we could probably talk for hours and hours about education. But yeah, I mean, I think the reality is, one of the things I wonder is, like, with all with all the technology, with all the YouTube things, there's so many educational things that you could utilize. Again, technology for. You definitely still need teachers. You need people, whether
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
parents or other teachers, but a lot of the learning could be automated much more than it currently is. Like, why not utilize the fact that some of the best educators are creating YouTube videos and use those, rather than having
Yeah.
somebody teach it in the classroom directly, when you've got somebody who can explain it much more clearly and articulately, right, through these other platforms. So I think we need to utilize those things. But first and foremost, we've got to get back, for the kids who are coming to the school, however the school is going to function. We need to get the education system focused on actually teaching what they're supposed to be teaching. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, science, that kind of stuff, rather than I don't know, being good global citizens or something.
Well, and that, and so much of that is, another thing that I would, as I look towards 26, I think it's so easy for a candidate for governor on either side to say, I'm going to reform the Department of Education. I'm going to get a great commissioner in there, and we're going to reform the Department of Education. Yeah, that's really important. Um, but our Constitution is such that so much of that power on what you teach in the classroom and how you go about your business is delegated to the local school board. So much of that stuff.
Yeah, which
And
I think is a good thing if we're doing government right.
I think it can be a good thing.
It can be.
Yeah, I think it can be a good thing. And I think back, when the Maine Constitution was developed in the 1820s, was, yeah, that was the design, is really informed local citizenry who is taking control of their school, of what they had, to do. Um, we've gotten away from that. And what we've done is we've allowed, we've taken a school board and we've completely neutered them. We tell,
Yeah.
they bring in a law firm and they say, you have to do whatever the superintendent says. And if you don't, you could get sued. And you need to just rubber stamp anything that he or she brings into you. What the next governor needs to do is, yes, reform the Department of Education, but that's small. That's small. What you
Yeah.
really have to do is you have to go in and you have to educate school boards that they do have power, and whatever law firm that's coming in and scaring the crap out of them the first time that they're elected is wrong. And
Yeah.
you can just do things. You can put into, you can pass a resolution at your school board to ban obscene materials in your library. You can do that. You can do
You mean book banning? Are
well,
you a
I'm
book
not running.
burner?
I'm Chuck. I'm not running a Barnes and Noble here. Okay, it's the school library. Like if we were banning things in Barnes and Noble, that's a different story than if we're banning them in the school
Yeah, no,
library.
I'm
But
so tired of the rhetoric around that. That's like one of the things that's actually built into our Constitution here in the state of Maine is that we're required to provide an appropriate education.
yes.
And appropriate, I think that is the key in this piece of the
Mhm.
conversation.
Yeah. No, and there's, I would love to talk some more about that because there's some statute that I think I would not like to draw attention to because I think it would get repealed like immediately under the current legislature. But there's my point in all of this is that, the next school board needs to help reform and encourage school boards that they can do things. Like they don't have to be a rubber stamp. They can get rid of their curriculum coordinator. You can just do it.
Yep.
You
They can
know,
just
you
fire him.
can,
Yeah.
and Heidi Sampson, who I know has been on the show, who is a
Yeah.
dear friend of mine, is doing this work. She's
Yep.
teaching, she's doing the work of educating school boards about what their power is. And if you do that and you really do engage the citizenry and what's going on in their schools, Maine is not set up for a top-down approach. You can't expect to take the same approach as Governor DeSantis is in Florida because their law is different. Like the way that
Yep.
their schools are set up is different. Maine is unique in that we can make really fast, really quick change if you educate school boards on what they can do, and they can do a lot.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. So not only is Heidi doing that, but Alan Servinas is running around.
Yeah, Alan's great.
Everywhere, telling people like this is a big part of what they're focused on is letting the school boards know what their rights are, like what they're supposed to be doing. Because this law firm, I don't mind naming them because but it's Drummond and Woodson is the primary one that's educating the school boards and giving them pieces of the information and trying to tell them that that's law. I've actually watched a clip from I think it was the Gray School Board of them kind of doing this and suggesting that the school board, once they get elected, they actually don't represent the voters, the people that elected them.
They represent the school.
The school and the kids, I think, right? But no mention of parents, which is just disgusting.
Or the taxpayer,
right?
Or the taxpayer.
Right. The parents and the taxpayer. I mean, the taxpayer pays for it. The parents are the ones that are ultimately responsible, first and foremost, for their children, and they need to be mentioned in that conversation. They're actually but let alone the law. And if the law doesn't say that, then the law needs to be, in my opinion, that's where the law would need to be adjusted. If Drummond and Woodson's right, and we know from other people who have law degrees and can research that they're actually not right. That actually there's a lot that they're leaving out. So anyway, theoretically, so I know that you are. I feel like we could keep talking about a ton of other things, but I want to. So after the legislature, what did you do after the legislature? And then I want to talk a little bit about if you were to run for. Yeah, we missed that part.
I know. I guess I kind of stopped, and when I got to the legislature, but from 2010 through 2018, I served in the Senate, represented part of Androscoggin and part of Kennebec County. It was great. I mean, I met my wife at the State House. Some of my dearest friends were there. I was very lucky. I got to serve not only with Dale, who we talked about before, but I got to serve with both my mom and my dad. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear things like this, but I have wonderful friends from the legislature on both the left and the right. And in fact, I'll show the story. It's not a secret. So my mom, after Dale turned out, my mom ran, and so I like to say that my parents like followed in my footsteps. But my mom ran for the House seat in Lisbon, and she won. And that was super cool. I got to serve with my mom, and we were very, very close. But my mom passed away in her first term. She passed away 7 months into her first term, very unexpected.
Sorry.
And in fact, it was the night before I was supposed to announce my campaign for governor in 2018. Wow. And I miss her terribly. She was a huge impact in my life. We were super close, and the legislature was a huge piece of my life. And a lot of the people that I count very close were like there for me when that happened to our family. And it was I had a very good experience in the legislature. And it was funny because after my mom passed away, my dad's an excavation contractor, like the last person you would ever expect to be in politics. And he always like cheered me and my mom on from the sidelines. But my mom, after she passed away, he decided he wanted to fill her term. And my dad is the exact kind of person you need in Augusta. My dad is salt of the earth. He's a great legislator because he talks to everyone and he knows everyone. And he is every man, and he's up there. He's serving his last term right now. I was very fortunate to be able to serve in that capacity. It's very unique. But when I decided to run in 2018 for the Republican nomination, I knew I wasn't the favored candidate. I knew that the larger forces that were at that time weren't interested in having me be in the nomination, but I felt called to it. I felt like the Holy Spirit was telling me that it was something I needed to do. Looking back on it now, I know why I was supposed to do that. After my mom passed away, we kind of got up on the back up in the saddle, and we ran that race. Ended up coming in second to Sean Moody. Sean is a wonderful guy. Had a tough campaign, but ended up not winning that race. And then, I do love, the work of government. Like I like to go in and I like to help people navigate the legislature, because the state house isn't made for everyday people. It's supposed to be, but it's not. And so me and my best friend opened a firm, and we do government affairs work for a lot of clients, like, which I won't name all my clients on here, but, we also do traditional public relations work for companies. So we don't just do government. We kind of navigate all of that stuff. And then on the side, my wife and I own a construction company. We build small homes, 2-bedroom, 1-bath little cottages. And we've been doing that for a few years now. And we also do a lot of property investing. So my wife and I think we're we're a little scrappy. We like to have a lot of projects going on. And so we have, and I think that's one of the things that's missing in Augusta is people who, fine, there's a lot of people that have run big businesses, but I think the people who maybe have like 2 or 3 businesses that they're working on in their family, I don't know if those voices are always heard in Augusta. And that's something that interests me.
Yeah, I think people who are doing that type of stuff, they're so busy working. We were supposed to be like represented by, people that, I think the idea is ideally we would, every type of person would be, essentially represented in Augusta so that everybody's voice is heard and we can come to conclusions that are best for everybody, all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't end up working out in reality, because people who are entrepreneurial don't have the time. Or people who are just like working and raising a family don't have the time, And so we end up having mostly, like, even though they don't get paid enough, it's somehow they find a way to have these career politicians in state politics. And the people aren't actually represented, unfortunately. But it's great that, I like entrepreneur. I like business, and I like people like starting something small and growing it bigger. That's something that I really enjoy. almost 15 years working in banking, helping clients navigate some of the financial side of growing their business, growing their wealth, whatever that might be, paying down debt. And so it's always fun to hear about new endeavors in construction, especially, you didn't say tiny homes, but small homes. Like, I feel like that's something that is probably in high demand right now, because I'm assuming they're a bit less expensive than the bigger homes. And you probably built. I'm going to make some assumptions that maybe you build them in such a way that if somebody wants to, add on later on, it's not that difficult. Or am I making an assumption that's not true?
No, so kind of similar, close. So we build what's called a backwards ADU. So usually what will happen is somebody will buy a house and then they'll put an ADU on afterwards. An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. Usually it's around 800 square feet. Can't be any more than 2 bedrooms or 1 bathroom. So what we do is we actually build the ADU first. And so, we put it in the back corner of a lot. And what that does is it allows you to get into something now that, maybe you just got married and you're going to have a family, or maybe you're single. It allows you to get into something now, but you still are able to build your forever home up front. And, that was our original intent, was to build in that way so that you can grow into your house. And, it also allows you to have an ADU for maybe an aging parent, or you can rent it out for additional money, which would allow you to build a bigger house. And I think it's a gateway to the traditional American dream. And I think as we move into a different financial time, and whether that's good or bad, we can talk about, but there's no doubt that the economy is changing. And I don't think that people my age, I'll be 40 next week. I don't think people my age are necessarily looking for a 4,000 square foot house. I think they might be totally fine with something smaller. They don't want junk around. I think a lot of millennials don't want to inherit the curio cabinet from great grandma. Like, I think a lot of people are more into little minimalism. And I think that we can think about housing differently. I think we can think about housing growing with us. And, there's a lot of people in the legislature who have done some really great work around, thinking about how we meet housing demand. Maine has a huge problem in that we also have some of the oldest housing stock in the country. So when you do buy a house, you're inheriting a lot of deferred maintenance many, many times. And so, I think there's something to be said about, we have to figure out how we're going to build homes less expensive, not cheaply, less expensive, and how we can do it in a way that helps families grow and not saddles them with a bunch of debt. And I think the next governor has to be able to think about housing in those terms. I think we need to do a better job of utilizing the natural resources that we have around us. Maine is the most highly forested state on this side of the Mississippi River. And I don't think that we take near as much advantage of that in acquiring resources to build.
Don't we import most of the wood that we use to build, despite having this huge forest of wood?
Most of the time, it is our wood. So the 2x4 you're getting is from Maine, but it usually will go to Canada to get processed and then come back.
How in the world does that make sense?
That's not universal. That is not universal. But I think we do need to do a better job of making things in Maine and being self-reliant. Because I think part of what you're seeing on a national level is that President Trump is exposing some of these inefficiencies and some of these ways that we've started to rely on other countries for things that we could very much do ourselves. And, I think that's something that the next governor needs to pay attention to. I don't want to see all of our wood go across the border, get processed and sold back to us for a premium. Let's process it here. Let's find a way. Let's find an incentive to get more Maine-made products building Maine homes.
Yeah, I would think that the governor could help a lot with that, along, especially if we can win back the legislature by creating incentives to rather than disincentives. Like a lot of the more you raise taxes, the more it discourages people from wanting to build something because you work really hard and all your money ends up going to other people, your employees, and then taxes, and then everybody's upset with you because of the weird way that our culture is for being somebody who owns a business. You terrible, awful person. You
Yeah.
mistreat your employees, and it's like I'm taking all the risk, but okay.
But
But
that,
but then
it's so true. And like, I think, I think one of the things that a governor can do, and so much of this comes back to energy. So
yeah,
much of it comes
taxes and
to,
energy. Yep.
listen, as a business owner, if it's cheaper for me to process something in Canada because I can, hook up to Hydro-Quebec where the cost is so much cheaper, I understand. I understand why people would make that decision. We have to, but in Maine, we've done a really good job of chasing off any potential low cost energy. We've been doing it for years. Been doing it for years. And,
Yep.
I think solar has its place. I'm not sure wind has its place, but like we need to have an all of the above approach to energy. Listen, AI is going to take all of the energy that we consume now and double that is what AI will need to operate in this country. That doesn't
Yeah.
that means you still don't have any lights, you still don't have any air
Yeah.
conditioning, you still, that's just for AI. So we
Well,
have
this
to
is why
do
I think Google announced that they're going to be building 6
nuclear
nuclear power
reactors. Yeah.
plants in the
Hmm.
United States to not to help with the energy problem and sell energy, but to take care of itself so that it can
Fund
do
their own
AI,
energy. Yeah.
funding their own AI. Right? That's just
Yes.
to, like that's a lot of energy, but
It's
that's
a
how
ton
much
of
AI
energy.
takes. Yeah.
And we have opportunity in Maine. In 2015, I was on the energy committee in the state legislature. This is a small example, right? This is just a
Yeah.
small example. There was a study done that the energy committee commissioned, and it looked at all of the untapped power in the state of Maine. There's 54 megawatts of power that is untapped, and it's all those little dams that you drive by in Maine that were once there to give power to some textile mill. It's all of these little things that are achievable, and you know you have that much power lying around in just our rivers and streams. Like, we should be incentivizing people to get those things up and running. Like, and I mean, it's a 2015 study, so it's 10 years old at this point. But I mean, I know that we're doing a great job of ripping out those dams right now. I mean, I know that's happening all the time. There's 2 dams in Androscoggin County that I know for a fact, because of the 100 megawatt cap that the state of Maine artificially imposed on renewable energy, that we don't include dams in that, and hydro energy. There's 2 dams right now that could double their capacity, but there is no financial incentive for them to do it because nobody would buy their energy. So like, we have so many of these problems are, the solutions are staring us in the face, and we have absolutely zero courage to take advantage of them. And that's what the next governor has to do, especially in regards to energy. I remember I think it was Boeing. Paul LePage was courting Boeing to come to Maine. They wanted to come to Maine. It saved them a ton of fuel because you could fly to Europe quicker. And we were competing against South Carolina, I believe it was. And it wasn't right to work. It wasn't access to workers. Those weren't the things that killed the deal. The thing that killed the deal was energy. That's what
Yeah.
killed the deal. And so I think, we have to, there's so much opportunity. I think a lot of people will say, well, we just need a nuclear reactor. But we actually have an advantage in that we did have a nuclear reactor. We had
And
one
we
in
shut it
Wisconsin, and we
down.
shut it down. And there's a whole lot of reasons on why that happened. And that's, not even worth the debate. But the fact of the matter is that plug is still there. I know it's like
Yep.
a really it's a It's not like you can just plug it back in, but I mean, you could
Yeah.
build something there, and not to mention we have spent nuclear fuel that's just there, which I think is another huge problem. But I mean, we have we have to do something about energy because it's the one thing that fixes everything else. I think we need to research tidal. I mean, we have some of the we have the deepest deep water seaport in America in Eastport, Maine. People don't know
Wow.
that. We don't have to
Yeah.
dredge it. And during the pandemic, there was a ton of cruise liners that set up shop in Eastport because it was easy and it was cheap. And there's
Hmm.
so much tidal that goes on in that area. That is an actual real thing that should be pursued. But
I heard.
yeah,
I think if I'm understanding correctly, there's basically ways in which we could use the tidal, the waves, essentially, to create energy. And
yeah,
somebody had told me and suggested that they had looked into it like decades ago, and that
mm,
effectively, like it had been squashed by some lobbyists for CMP, or something along those lines. This is the rumor anyway. I'm not 100% sure. But the reality is, like, the understanding is that there's a lot of energy producing opportunity there that's been being completely missed. And what you're kind of highlighting here is, like, we're trying to bust this myth as much as possible. Republicans are not against the environment. We don't want to
yeah,
destroy the environment. We're not opposed to cleaner forms of energy, but actually have to, I think, sustainable. They have to actually work.
yeah,
They
right.
can't be part of a religious obsession that has no basis in reality. It's like it's like the way that I say religious, just because of the way in which the Democrats cling to solar
Well, there's an element of
and
that. There is. Yeah,
and wind. Is it's a religious, these are the tenets of the faith of the Democrat Party, and you have to agree to it, even, and you have to not ask questions about the environmental concerns and risks associated with both of them, of which there exist. But I do, but like, the reality is, like, we're looking at, okay, because there are problems with both of them being dependent on the weather and not being like, again, sustainable, not being something that we can trust all the time. We have to have other forms of energy,
yeah,
and that are helpful to the environment. And you've mentioned multiple, and I know that Reagan Paul has done a lot to talk about
yeah.
that in the legislature and in social media. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think it's really important. And then
Well,
again, the idea of investigating tidal, it's like, look at this, we're actually talking about clean energy right here.
yeah.
And apparently, but we're not allowed to, because we don't have the Democrat stamp of approval.
Well, that's right. And the other thing that I find interesting is, like, I like solar subsidies. Yeah, bad. The way that Maine has
Right,
done it, especially, not great. But you
right.
know what? Like, the house, and I feel like I'm pitching like our construction company right now. I'm really not. But, like, with how homes are insulated now and what code requires, there is an argument to be made. Like, you throw a couple of solar panels on the top of your roof, especially as maybe an older couple that wants to downsize and is living on a fixed income. Solar panels can fix your energy costs. Like, what you're paying for it. You're not subject to the whims of the market. Like, it's. I'm not saying that you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't subsidize it to the level that it's a preferred form of energy. And
Yeah.
there's so many places that we can go to get more energy. Have you ever had anybody on talk about Muskrat Falls up in Newfoundland?
No, no, no.
Okay.
I don't think so.
There is this huge project that the Canadian government has been working on for the better part of 30 years. All right. And it's called Muskrat Falls. And it is one of the largest hydro projects outside of the Three Rivers, the Yellow River Dam in China, that has ever been taken on. They have no place to send the power. They have no place to send the power. And if there's been a lot of talk about getting a transmission line from Muskrat Falls into Maine that would connect either through Aroostook County or through Wiscasset, through where Maine Yankee used to be. But there's all this stranded energy that we could take advantage of. We need an ambitious project. Like, we need something ambitious like that, because all of these problems, like these economic problems that we're facing, can be solved if we can get cheaper energy. And
Yeah.
one of the other things too is, we're talking about building materials. the University of Maine in Orono, their composite labs is incredible. What they're doing there is really cool. And one of the things that they do is compressed fiber. So they build materials that are stronger than steel that you could use to build a home. In fact, in the Czech Republic, they're doing this. They're using that pressed fiber, and they're laser cutting all of your framing. So like you can go in and they just like laser cut your door and your window and where all of your conduit goes for your electricity. And it's super highly insulated and it's completely renewable. Here we go again talking about renewable things, right? But like, we have this going on at the University of Maine, but we can't produce it here in Maine. You want to know why? Because we can't. The companies that do it, there's one called Smart Lamb out in Montana, and and we actually competed for them to come to Maine, and we lost out to Alabama. Even though we have the wood mix right here in our woods, it's still worth it to produce it someplace else because the energy costs are so high. And so, we have to focus on that because we're going to lose. We're going to lose the AI race. We're going to lose the affordability race. We're going to lose the housing race. We're going to lose all these things if we don't take advantage.
I think we'll be fine. We just increase taxes.
Yeah, I mean, at least we can burn the wood, right? We can stay warm by burning the wood. So
yeah, no, I try to understand what's in the mind of the other side at this point, because like when it comes to all of the meaningful issues that seem to be the biggest challenges that we're facing, they just don't have any legitimate answer. At this point, outside of like, well, we'll tax the rich. That seems to be the only risk, or even the poor. Like whether they're looking to tax people for smoking cigarettes and their prescription drugs and stuff like that. That hasn't gone through yet, but I'm pretty sure that's going to happen before the end of the session.
I've always found it so interesting. Like when it comes to taxes, and the left's version of taxes always change depending on what you're going to do. They don't look at, Republicans will typically look at an income tax as, oh, well, income tax discourages people from making money, because somebody's going to take your taxes, your hard-earned money, and give it to the government. And Democrats say, no, it's just to fund these programs. But then when you take a cigarette tax, it's like, well, we're going to discourage this behavior. We're going to discourage smoking by raising the cost of a pack of cigarettes. And it always just depends on what they're trying to do with whatever, they're going to twist, however they're going to twist things. But I mean, in regards to taxes, listen, the rich can move.
Yeah,
the rich can move.
A lot of them have already moved to New Hampshire. Yeah.
Like you can simply, for people like us, like, we don't have that luxury, but the rich can just move. There are people that plan their entire retirement by moving to Florida, which is, I get it. Like, great, good for you. But I mean, imagine if we had a tax environment that would incentivize people to stay, and
yeah, I mean, we have so many snowbirds, and they pay taxes. They pay real estate taxes up here, but they're paying their income taxes down in Florida, and they're spending. And because of that, they have to spend 6 months in a day rather than just like 3 months because it's cooler down there. And a lot of them are able to afford having two homes and having that other home in Florida simply by having their primary residence be in Florida. They're still here half the year, but they would be here. These are people that have money and they're retired, and they could be spending money, and they could be here 9 months out of the year instead of 6, but they're only coming up 6 so that they don't have to pay taxes up here, which means a lot of that money, we'll just say 3 months worth of that money is being spent in Florida instead of in Maine.
And a lot of them don't want to do that. They have grandkids here. They have, family here. They don't, it's not that they're looking to, but, even though those people can leave, they're probably not uber wealthy. They're just making enough and making it work in the best way that they can, to fund a retirement. And, it's just, as I look around, Maine is becoming so unaffordable. It's just becoming unaffordable. And that's something that I'm very, very concerned about. And like I said, I mean, these solutions aren't easy, but they're there, and you just have to have the courage to implement them. And as we think about 26, those are the things that people are concerned about. Like their paychecks are not going as far anymore. We're not bringing in the industry that we need to offset people's property taxes. Like the best thing that the government could do, like the state government that is, to reduce people's property taxes is incentivize businesses to come to Maine so that it offsets that for people.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we have Maine. I think one of the things that bothers me the most about this, and I hear candidates for governor and they keep talking about, well, I care about Maine and I want, I care about my grandkids and I care about this. I come from yes, I care about that. Like I said, I have a wife, 5-year-old daughter. I very much care and want my family to remain in Maine for as long after I'm gone. But it's more than that for me. The reason I'm even thinking about this is because I look at it from a business perspective and it's a missed opportunity. Maine has so much to offer. Maine has so much to offer. Like, we talked about all these items, but like it's not just about quality of living. It's we actually can, reduce our energy bills by taking advantage of what we have around us. We can decrease housing costs by taking advantage of what's
I
around
mean,
us.
obviously,
Like,
we have so many trees.
yeah.
If the fact that stuff costs as much as it costs here, given the natural resources we have, doesn't it's like one of those things like, how does this make any sense? We've got
Mhm.
so much forest, and yet it costs us, it should be something that shouldn't be that expensive to come up with the materials. The labor, that's a whole nother story. But at least the materials should be a lot more expensive. It's a lot less expensive, it seems to me, than they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of that. I mean, some of it's a global marketplace that it's hard to
Yeah.
combat, but there's a lot of it that's also not.
Yeah.
And, I see so much squandered opportunity in Maine. And
Yeah.
I
Yep.
I want someone to realize it. Like I want someone to go in there and not paint this doom and gloom picture because it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to
Yep.
be doom and gloom. Like
Yeah.
there's so much potential in Maine. There's a reason, not to bring up a sore subject, but like there's a reason our license plates say vacation land. It's because, we have a lot of
Yeah.
tourism and people come on the trip of a lifetime to Maine.
Yeah.
Like, they want to come and see what we have. We have a lot to offer, and I want our government and I want our governor to be an ambassador to the world and tell everybody why Maine is a great place to live, do business, raise a family. You can do it all here in Maine. And one
Yeah.
of the things. Go
Where
ahead.
else do you have like lakes? You have lakes and mountains and ocean, and so much of it.
Yeah,
Like we have the best. We have everything.
we have
Um,
everything.
I really think I've visited a lot of places. My wife's from Kenya and or from Rwanda, lives in Kenya, but I've also gone a lot of other places in America, and I just always come back and I'm just like, why would I go anywhere else if
Yeah.
if I can afford to stay here? Why would I leave?
My wife
You know,
is my wife is from California, and she's from right outside San Francisco. And San Francisco's really nice to like. The weather's nice. Like, don't get your car broken into, which you probably will if you're there long enough. But whenever we go out to visit, I'm ready to come home.
yeah,
And it's been fun to watch my wife, like as much as she misses California because she's from California, just like I'd
yep,
miss Maine if I moved someplace else. um, it's fun to watch how that's changed for her. Like, I'm glad I'm home, and
yep.
Maine is a wonderful place, and it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. We can change it, and take advantage of what we have. It doesn't have to be the way that it is.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna at some point ask the question, like, if you did run for governor, which I think I hear rumor that you're considering, like, what would be the issues that you would run on? But I think you've probably covered them at this point, unless you wanted to give like a 5 bullet points of the important issues, and if there's anything else that you haven't covered. But I think we've got energy, we've got taxes, we've got protecting girls' sports.
Yeah. I think
Housing.
I think that a couple of things that I'm concerned with right now that I look at is so I'm a county commissioner. I serve on the Androscoggin County Commission, and I'm really concerned about public safety.
Yeah,
One of the things that is starting to creep its way, especially in Scotland County, I mean, Lewiston, Auburn are our cities, large cities, but it's not Portland, right? We're starting to see a lot more crime. Our jail has been at or over capacity for quite a while, and that wasn't the case up until a few years ago. We were actually able to make a little bit of revenue off of our jail by boarding federal prisoners, and we can't do that anymore.
yeah,
And it's kind of blowing a hole in a lot, not just our budget, but a lot of county budgets. So I'm really concerned about the amount of crime that's going along around, and especially in our cities. And the natural progression to that is I'm also really concerned about our law enforcement. We have far too many vacant positions in our state police. We have far too many
yeah,
vacant positions in our local police forces, and part of that is because it's just not worth the risk personally. You
yeah.
don't know if you're going to have the back, if your government's going to have your back if you have to make a hard decision out on the road. And I think when you could go to someplace like we say Florida, but go someplace like Florida where they're going to have you back. And so you want to. I am very concerned about public safety.
Yeah, on police, just one real quick. Well, I know a number of people in law enforcement throughout the state, and I won't get into who and where, but I do understand that. Yeah, we don't have enough people who are trying to get into it, and it's a really, this is what people don't understand with this, like hating on the police. That I think is something that happens in our society, is that, like, as much as there are problems in the police in the United States of America, there are corrupt police officers, absolutely, no
Sure.
question. There's no in every industry in the world, and even in America, you have corruption to some degree. But by and large, most of them are working really hard to try and make our streets safe. And what do they get in
100%.
what do they get in
Yeah.
exchange for that? They get hated. Everybody looks on them with suspicion, to the point where, like, I don't know if you're aware of this, but most of the time, once somebody becomes a police officer, the only people that they end up being friends with are other police officers, because of how other people view them and how other
Yeah.
people treat them. And these are the people that literally are out there putting their lives on the line for us so that we can be safe.
Yeah.
And they're dealing with, like, we know, like, a vast majority of what they deal with outside of, like, violent criminals and drug trafficking and stuff like that, which they have to track that down, but is like
Mm.
domestic disputes, people with mental health issues. And so they're really doing an incredibly challenging job and not being appreciated by the
Yeah.
public. So that's point number one. Point number two is, I know somebody who does some of the training for police here in the state of Maine, and I understand there's just not enough people that are applying for those types of roles.
That's right.
And there, when you get into that kind of a situation, then, like, if there are not that many people applying, are you taking people that maybe aren't as qualified as you actually want, but you have to have somebody to fill the role? I'm not saying that they're lowering their standards. I don't know for sure, but, like, there's a challenge there when you don't have enough people that meet the standard, but you
Yeah.
still need to hire people. What do you do? And
That's
so,
right.
like, these are big challenges. And again, it gets at, like, what we're actually producing out of our education system, if you want to call it that. That's probably part of the problem here, is that people aren't ready to do hard work when they get out of school. Um, but I think this kind of, like, attitude toward police, well, who would want to go and do that job when you demonize the entire industry? And then you ask people to go and sacrifice their lives and maybe not
Yeah.
be put in a situation where they might not come home. And then if something does happen, you make these stupid quick comments about, like, well, you knew what you're getting into. It's like, are you, like, this?
Yeah.
But these are the types of things that you hear people say around law enforcement. So I just felt like that needed to be said. But yeah, I definitely think
No,
public safety is a problem.
you're right. And
Yeah.
one of the things that concerns me about public safety specifically is, I asked in a recent county commission meeting, I asked, what percentage of our inmates are, are suffering from some sort of mental health episode. And the jail administrator said to me, without any hesitation, 100%.
Yep.
All of them are suffering mental health episodes. And what we're doing is we're expecting the criminal justice system to take care of people with mental health issues. And we have to figure out, who has done crime that you need to go to jail,
Yep.
And then if you have somebody that is like, oh, you need help, like you need actual help.
Right.
Not saying that they shouldn't pay for their crimes. They should pay for their crimes, but they also need to be handled, and maybe they shouldn't be in a jail. Maybe we need to do something different. Maybe Riverview needs to be something bigger. There was a reason that we had facilities like that in the past.
Like Amhi, right?
Yeah, not to say that we shouldn't, that they should be run the way they were in the past. I mean, we just went through a consent decree, but and whether we should have ended that or not is a different story for another podcast. But I mean, there was a reason that those facilities existed alongside of the criminal justice system. And so I'm very concerned. We have a mental health crisis in this country, and it's ravaging a lot of areas of government. The other thing that I have deep concern about, and it's something that I don't know why people aren't talking about this, is what is going on at DHHS with children is appalling. It is appalling. And you talked about Bill Diamond, who I count as one of the best public servants in the state of Maine. I don't know of a man that loves Maine more than Bill Diamond, and especially kids. He's written multiple books on the subject. I've read most of them. We served together in the Senate. We worked on one of the initiatives he and I worked on together. A lot of people don't know this, and I'll give a shout out to things that government is doing well, is we have one of the best computer crime units in the entire country, right here in the state of Maine. And it's filled. We have a backlog of hard drives that you would not even believe. And Bill Diamond and I work to get more funding for that because it's something that we're doing really well. And these people catch some of the sickest, most disgusting, scum of the earth people, trafficking, child porn, all the worst things that you could think of. And they do a really, really good job. But I am concerned with the fact that we have had so many deaths of kids in state custody, and no one is ringing an alarm bell except for him. I have deep concerns about it. And I would encourage anybody to read the Walk a Mile report that was put out a few months back that they put out. There's some real solutions in there that I would like the next governor to implement. The department absolutely needs to be moved out of DHHS. DHHS is way too big, and we got to reformulate that department. We have to make sure that these kids are protected, and there is a blueprint to do that and needs to be followed.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just, as soon as I heard his thing, I was like, if he'll come on my podcast, he's a Democrat. This is more of a conservative. It's really truth focused, but from a conservative perspective. And he was willing to come on and happy to come on. And again, his organization is nonpartisan anyway. But yeah, I just really appreciate that about him, and I wanted to make sure as many people as possible heard about it, because to your point, like, if we're not protecting our children, why do we? I mean, that has to be one of the most important thing, right? Things related to protecting vulnerable children, and like you said, it doesn't make sense to me why nobody else is talking about it. Yeah.
It's such a, I mean, you have kids that they have a term, it's called hoteling. And you have kids that are in hotel rooms for months at a time, months. And that's just unacceptable. And we don't, as far as foster families go, they're being asked to do way too much. And, when I think about government, I think about, we have to make sure that the basic needs are covered, right? Like, we have to make sure that our most vulnerable protected. Republicans should not have to be begging to have nursing home reimbursements And, you know, kids that we're talking about here fund it. We should not have that. That should just be
Yeah.
the basic. That should just be the basic. And so I'm really, you see all these other, programs that are eating into the state budget, and these other programs are going without. Maine is the oldest state by average age in the entire country, and we don't have the nursing homes to keep up with it. And we have to make sure that our oldest and our youngest are taken care of. And so that's
Yep.
another thing that I look at and that I want to work on is, how do we make sure that these people are taken care of? And I think all of these things, a lot of them are budgetary, right? A lot of them have to
Yep.
do with money. But how do you fix that? You fix that by unburdening the taxpayer, number one, and you drive innovation, development, and
Yeah.
business opportunity in the state of Maine. And
Yep.
that's what the next governor has to be. They have to find a way to take the burden off the taxpayer and let them breathe a little bit and bring industry and opportunity into the state. And I think if you have a governor that truly thinks of themselves as an ambassador to the world of why Maine is great, it's all achievable.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's one of the big. Like, if we can get businesses to come here, not only will that create better job opportunities, but it also will they'll burden, because they're going to be making a lot of money in the state and
Mm-hmm.
spending a lot of
Yeah.
money in the state. So it's going to generally help the economy anyway, but it's also going to generate a lot more tax revenue, which is going to mean that the average taxpayer is going to have to pay less. And I think this is one of the things that sometimes these policymakers, I don't know, the unintended consequences. Maybe they know what they're doing, and I don't know. I can't. Sometimes it's hard to understand where people are coming from, because some things just make sense to me. Like, especially my understanding of economics, it's like, this is very simple. This is not calculus. But for other people, it's a challenge, or but I think a lot of it still has to do with that. We talked about the religious observance of the Democrat Party, where they're told that they have to be hard. If they let a big business come in, and maybe they even incentivize them to come in, and that's giving money to the rich, and that's bad, even though like the actual net result is better for people. That conflicts with their religion of of
Yeah.
hating the rich. So anyway, it's interesting. Well, was there anything else that you wanted to share around? I mean, I feel like we could probably keep on going for another couple of hours. It's been a great conversation, but in
Yeah.
terms of like a potential gubernatorial race, if you do determine, do end up declaring, anything else that you'd want to share about, what issues matter? But I think you've covered
You
quite a bit.
know,
So
I think, yeah, I mean, I think we hit a lot of issues, and I think one thing that I know is this, is that, I've watched the field develop, and I have a lot of respect for a lot of these folks who are jumping in the race. Like, I look at a guy like Bobby Charles, and Bobby has done fantastic work in the private sector. He's obviously got a lot of law enforcement intelligence, and I think that's awesome. I look at a guy like Robert Wessels. He's great. He is an everyman.
yeah, yep,
Like
yep,
he saw a void, he wants to fill it, and he's out there making his case on his scooter and doing his thing, man.
yep.
And Jim Libby is an admirable Mainer. He
Yeah.
is a wonderful man. I've gotten to know him in the legislature. My business partner played basketball for him at Thomas. Like,
Oh, nice.
Jim's a really, really great guy.
Yep.
I could go through all of these people who are thinking about running, and they're true patriots. And I think, in this next primary, like, should I get in, my goal is, at the end of the day, I want us to go out united, and, for whoever ends up winning the day, because you don't have time. We're not Florida. We're not Texas. Like, if we are granted a Republican trifecta in Maine, you got 3 months. You have 3 months. That's it. And
Yep.
if you don't get it done and you're learning on the job, we don't have time for that. And so I've been meeting with all of these people. I've been,
Yep.
sharing my ideas. They've been sharing theirs with me. I haven't met with everybody yet, but I've met with some multiple times, and I'm going to
Yep.
keep doing it because
Awesome.
I don't. I want us to be successful because I think that we have something. I think we have opportunity and hope to offer to Maine people, and it does not have to be about all the ills in the world. We have a lot of the solutions to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm happy with the field. All the people that keep coming out. I mean, I feel like what I can say is that we will at least have one good opportunity, good option. You know what I mean? Like at this point, in my opinion, whoever comes out of the field will be far better. Than anything that the Democrats are going to throw out there. Obviously, we need to find what's going to be the best, the best to actually, like you said, get elected and get things done. Those are the two most important things. That I'm a non-endorsement individual, so I won't pick anybody before but I'm very thankful to everybody who's like taking the time. And like I said, I think we've got some great options, and I think we need to come together around who I think has the best, not just the best chance to win. We want the right candidate, but we also need to take into account the ability to win.
Yeah,
Here,
and it's
here
like
in Purple Maine.
I think so many people, a lot of politicians are drawn to like put a message out there that I'm a fighter, like I'm
Yeah.
a fighter. But more importantly than being a fighter is you got to be a winner,
Yeah.
and you have to actually win the fights. A lot of my cousins do MMA, like they do jujitsu, and have fought at NEF and stuff like that. And there's a lot of guys who are fighters, and they're the sparring partners to the guys like Conor McGregor and people like that.
Wow.
They're not out there fighting and winning. And whoever
Yeah.
we put up can't just be a fighter. They got to
Yeah.
be a winner, and they have to have a proven record of that. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
looking for.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks again for taking the time to come on. And
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody for watching. Everybody at home, remember, you can support the Muddy Waters podcast, and it doesn't have to be painful. In addition to watching, you can like, share, subscribe on all the other different social media platforms. People find their information in different places, so we try to be just about everywhere. But you can also go to muddywaters.us and check out. We've got some decent merch, a lot of fun things. We've even got a GOP bumper sticker on there with like 5 issues that I think are key issues for Mainers. So if you want a GOP for me bumper sticker that says protect girls sports and spaces, reopen Maine for business, restore public safety, lower energy costs, and fix Maine schools, you can find that at muddywaters.us.
We hit all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hit all that. That's
Yeah,
good. I didn't
we
even
sure
know.
did. Yeah, you had no idea. But yeah, nice, easy bumper sticker to put on your car to say represent what we actually stand for, rather than what we're accused of as being the party of no. So that's one easy way. Tons of other merchandise on there, mugs and all kinds of fun stuff. So check it out. Thanks again, Garrett, and we'll see you guys back here again. I think tomorrow we've got a mom who is trying to help her town flip a school board. I think the school board is red, but trying to help them come into compliance, we'll say, on Title IX and related issues. So she's going to share some tomorrow. So we'll see you guys again here tomorrow.
See ya. Thank you.